We are on episode 16 and talking about ATOs and reducing the daily maintenance safely. So episode 16 of the 52 weeks was all about ATOs, and we have, I would imagine that not a lot has changed here. We've just gotten smarter about a few things.
A couple of things have changed, I think, about ATO since we talked about it, but it's a pretty robust area.
It's a very robust
There's a couple
area.
of tips in here. If you listen to it, you'd say, oh yeah, I could do this better.
Didn't even think about that. Yeah.
So core belief here is, core belief in terms of auto top-offs is, this guides all of us in all the decisions that we'll make, is water level valves and sensors have a high failure rate in salt water.
Mm-hmm.
The best ATOs will embrace that, right? And so that it's just true. Water level valves and sensors have a high failure rate in saltwater, specifically high organic saltwater.
Yeah.
So, all right, what do we believe most then?
First thing that we believe matters most in terms of ATOs, ATO eliminates one of the biggest tasks. One area where one of the most expensive is actually the most popular when it comes to like buying an ATO. This is one of those areas where one of the most expensive options is the most popular, and there's probably a reason for it because it has a long history of being trustworthy.
Yeah. So ATO being like, I used to walk up there and pour fresh water in the top of the tank.
It's a remnant of the freshwater community, because I remember that worrying about the evaporation was just nothing. The only thing that I was worried about in freshwater evaporation was that nasty scum line at the top, and I want to get rid of that. I mean, top off the water.
Well, there's two differences here now though between freshwater.
Yeah.
Freshwater, there isn't as much flow, so the evaporation is much slower.
Yeah.
Two, in saltwater, freshwater, if you evaporate, the only thing that really changed is the water level went down. In saltwater,
everything,
all the chemistry is getting more potent. The salt isn't going anywhere.
Yep.
And the water's going
Neither
somewhere.
is the calcium,
more and more
alkalinity.
concentrated.
Yeah, all of everything.
So bad news, but also not the kind of thing that everybody wants to do is go top it off every single day, because many tanks, because we burn through so much more water, you may need a gallon of water every day. And so auto top off solves that, and end of story. Tune's oscillator is the one that everyone uses. It's the one that if you want one that doesn't flood your floor, it's gonna protect your tank, your house, all of it.
Lasts.
Yeah. It is the most trusted, longest used one. I'd say, it's a tough jump after that. If I had to jump after that,
like a second,
it would probably be. It hasn't been as round as long, but it'd probably be the Neptune ATK, just because it has an incorporated float valve in it, which isn't as susceptible to many things as the float switches and opticals. Yeah. It has the timer issue. It even has you can plug in the leak sensors into it, so you're not just optical float timers, and then backed up. Even if it did, then all of a sudden there's leak sensors, level sensors you can plug into it even higher. So and then also you get the audible alarms with it. If it failed, I'm gonna get an email that says, "Go save me."
Yeah.
You don't get that. So the only reason I would put the oscillator over the ATK in that case would be just because
it's got such a long trusted history.
Okay, early on I had 3 different auto top offs fail me, flooded my floor, messed up my tank. I switched the oscillator, and now I've got 17 years and 8 million tanks, and I've never had an oscillator pause in on position flooding the tank. The opticals will get dirty and fail off sometimes, but that's not my biggest concern. Mm-hmm. And so just based on experience alone, and we use them here and no tank would ever consider anything else.
I think there's more oscillators on tanks here than any other thing. Like 90 to 95% of tanks running in this building have an oscillator on it. I mean, I wouldn't choose anything else for my own tank. And when I set up my mom's tank, oscillator. You best be sure. Next thing that matters most is kind of funny is don't use the latest tech, no matter how sexy it is.
You're dealing with water, man. It's gonna flood on your floor and all this stuff. And I've seen them. Everybody comes out. The next one is cheaper. It's better. It's faster.
5,
whatever.
6 redundancies.
18 million sensors on it. I don't know. here's the piece: is if it's significantly cheaper and you want to save some money, then so be it. I understand that one. If it's in the same price range as the Osmolator, I don't understand.
I'd recommend.
I don't know why you would use something that is less proven. I don't get it at all. All right. Next one here is the float valve. Valve meaning not a switch, but a valve like your little toilet valve.
Yep.
Are the best redundancy and put it well above the water line. Meaning, I don't want the float valve to be the primary, which is telling me the water line, because salt creep can actually build up in the little seal, like where the rubber is, and then prevent it from sealing. And I don't want it to be the primary for that reason. So what I'll do is I'll drill a hole and put it a few inches above the water line.
Yep.
So the sensors, the float switch or the optical sensors are adjusting. But if for whatever reason those things were to fail, and water level would go up, it would hit the float, and it would just shut off the water supply. We have drill bits. You can drill a hole right through your glass in your glass sump. We have any old drill bit probably can get through your acrylic sump.
Good old stepper, yeah.
To be able to put a float. It's like a 1/2 inch, I think, hole that you're going to drill just to put in the float valve. I think everyone should do this. It's like a $13 thing, and especially if you're going to use a cheaper float or ATO, it is a really easy, $10 or so solution.
If you're thinking of running the ATOs kind of the way we do around here with ATO box sensors, ATO box filled with connected to your RODI unit, and then the ATO box feeding the tank. On the 160, we actually have the RODI unit connected directly to the tank with layers of redundancy all the way there, and the last layer being that float valve.
All right. Next thing we believe most is an auto top-off should hold about a week's worth of water, but not overflow the tank. So, I would get the biggest auto top-off I could get without overflowing the tank. So if it failed and emptied all of the fresh water in there for some reason, it would stay inside of the sump.
It's pretty easy to calculate or get an idea of how much water your tank's evaporating, and it will change based on your ambient temperature, season that whatever season it is, drifts, all kinds of those things will change. But I can fill up a 5-gallon or a bucket or a 1-gallon jug with put my ATO in there and be like, all right, well, how long it's empty by the end of the day. That's a gallon. That's a gallon a day. A week's worth would be a 7-gallon ATO or a 5-gallon ATO.
With a 5-gallon bucket, see how many days. I would say the reason I only say about a week is because I'd like to do a little bit of maintenance every week. So on the weekend, I'll find a chunk of time to be able to do some maintenance, and then filling the auto top off once a week is no big deal. But doing it every day sucks.
And the second part of that was not enough to overflow the tank, meaning if for some reason your ATO were to get stuck on, there's not enough water in there that would overfill your tank to the point where it starts overfilling onto the floor.
Yeah, and if you added 10 gallons of fresh water to your 100-gallon tank because the ATO failed, is that good for the tank? No, but yeah, it's only a 10% reduction. So your alkalinity just fell from 8 to 7.2.
Yeah,
it's going to survive that. So you can fix that. So I wouldn't get too hung up on what the fresh water is going to do to the tank unless it's total catastrophe, like you hooked it up to a 50-gallon drum and that whole thing went in. Well, then you're probably dead. But a week seems about the right time. But you can also do more with the right amount of redundancy.
Yeah. So we believe matters most is the ATO box can hold more water capacity than a week with redundancy. That's the I've got my flow lock on my RODI line that feeds my ATO box, that has a float valve in it, that has a leak sensors all around it connected to a solenoid that will shut the water flow off, and all these different types of sensors that you can put in there. Even like optical sensors just inside the ATO reservoir where I have a high sensor and a low sensor, and I know when the water is too high for me and I know when it hits the bottom. Even just being aware of that when you're not around.
So Randy might have just lost you with all the sensors here. There's a lot of redundancy. When you're talking about redundancy, it's going to be solenoids, flows. It could be 8 million things, right?
Yeah.
I will tell you, this is just me, but if I had the space, if I had an osmolator and I incorporated the float valve into the sump, I'd plug it into a 50-gallon drum, no problem.
Hmm.
The chances of the oscillator, it's been working for me on dozens and dozens and dozens of tanks for a decade plus. And then if it were to fail, also the float valve would catch it. Good, I'm good.
Easy.
If all that stuff fails, I wasn't meant to have this tank. So, but you can also go past that. You could put a backup of a solenoid on there, or like a solenoid from like your Apex. They have little 1/4-inch solenoids.
Yep.
You could put a float valve or a water sensor or a
Flow lock.
optical sensor on there. The flow lock thing he's talking about is like, it's like basically an RO fitting with a little cotton wad in there, and if it detects water, the cotton water like wicks it up and then pushes the valve open.
Closes it.
Yeah, so like a really manual, cheap solution. Another one is just even the audible alarm from the Watchdog. You know, a $12 thing you get Home Depot or from here. Just, hey, dude, I failed. Water's going over. But a really good auto top off and the float valve. I'm comfortable that that's enough redundancy for a pretty big body of water. Next one.
Oh, what we believe matters most. You can hook an RO system up to the tank, despite popular belief in what I was told. You don't hook your RO system straight to the tank with the float valve because you're just asking for failure. But you can with enough redundancies in place.
It's tempting, man. You know, and like, here's the nature of it: is you're plugging in with an RO system going to your tank. You're plugging in a basically never-ending water supply to the tank. If it fails, it's going to fail catastrophically.
Pour. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, is it a terrible idea? I don't know, but God, is it convenient? You know, I mean, like, you'll never, ever, ever fill up your auto top off again. You'll never carry another bucket of water again in your life if you hook up your RO system directly to the tank. And there are better ways to do it than others, but you can do it.
Solenoids.
So, yeah, one, definitely the float valve is important in this case. But the solenoids.
Yeah. So
think of a couple of different solenoid options.
we have, I think the 160 is tied to the Tunzi sensors, but it goes to, is it the safety switch or something that toggles off and on the solenoid?
So with the Tunes Osmo, you can unplug the pump. It comes with a little powered pump, and you can plug in a
Powered
solenoid. Yep.
So now instead of having a pump turn on and off and pump water in, it just opens and closes a valve to your direct RODI line from your RODI unit. And so when the water level sensor, optical sensor says, hey, time for water, just pops open the water line, fresh RODI water from your unit gets there, and then when it hits the other sensor, shuts it down. Like laden with redundancies, those flow lock things, just in case the solenoid failed open, because it's powered. When it's on under power, it's powered open. So that
it overheats.
It can overheat and fuse together. Yeah.
Yeah, it will definitely fail. So that's an option. You can also do the same thing with an Apex and the solenoid that plugs into it as well. You can use level sensors and the ATK with that as well. But there's a variety of ways that you can hook it up that way. Our favorite way is actually to just use a float valve onto an auto top-off box, like a 10-gallon auto top-off box, and have that thing always full just from opening and closing. And then in that case, off of that, have the oscillator in there and the float valve in the tank. And the reality of that float valve failing catastrophically in freshwater is really, really low.
Yeah, it's clean, ultra pure RODI water. There's hardly a contaminant buildup or anything else.
I've never heard of one of these float valves failing in a freshwater environment. It's kind of like your toilet. It's pretty rare. Can it happen? Sure.
And there's for some people, there's a concern that people might ask themselves, well, what about leaching, or the term is leaking my mind. Letting the ATO box go all the way down.
TDS creep?
Yeah, TDS creep. But how do you avoid TDS creep? Because as soon as you turn your RO on, meaning that slightest little downturn in my float valve means it's calling for water from my RODI unit, which could be TDS, a high amount of TDS in there. You can use like a Tunes, water controller has two float valves or float sensors. So when your ATO container gets down to the bottom one, then it opens up the solenoid to fill up your your ATO reservoir, rather than only going a little bit and then filling back up, only going a little bit and filling it back up. You can actually use the whole container at once, so it fills the whole container at once.
Not sure how much that water controller is, but it's over $100.
Yeah.
So for the average person, the TDS just burning through more resin is probably cheaper. But like if you have 500 TDS water, and then that initial purge every time is 60, 70, or 100 TDS coming through, you're burning through resin like nobody's business. And so having that ability to, let it drain all the way out and fill it up, probably having some of the auto flush features and a booster pump and stuff would help as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, that is the way that we would hook up an RO system directly to the tank. If you do that, you'll never, ever, ever carry another bucket of fresh water again.
It's really nice.
And less maintenance means that you can actually maintain the things that are most important. Next one.
Sensors need to be cleaned. Waiting for failure is a low percentage.
Optical sensor, if it's dirty, doesn't work.
You should probably bathe these in citric acid monthly or at least quarterly.
I find just even a rag, man, it's like just cleaning the algae and gunk and stuff off of it. Anything will, because they're usually in the dark, so they're not getting like a lot of anything super crusty or anything on them.
Yeah.
But the alternative though is the float switches generally get salt creep.
Those are the quickest to fail because they got stuck and they were dirty.
So in that spirit, what we believe matters most is floats usually get dirty and fail off. Basically what it's doing is it's like a little cone and it shoots like a light beam down and it hits the angle, comes back over and comes back up. If the water isn't there, it doesn't happen.
Optical, yep.
Yeah, so if you submerge the optical, it's like a little cone, beam comes down, bounces over, goes back up. As long as it sees that, when it's submerged in water, it will continue to work. If it's not submerged in water, the beam actually passes through. Mm-hmm. So when it's dirty, it also does the same thing when it's basically not submerged in water.
Basically fails off. The opposite of that is the floats. Floats fail on and off. So like my float could be normally open, normally closed, up or down, or what have you. But salt creep builds up if my float switch is down in the bottom. Salt creep builds up on the top, can't go back up. Vice versa, it could be up here and it gets dirty and whatnot underneath. So when it tries to go down, it gets stuck, or wandering snail or what have you. But they can fail both on and off.
Moving parts in salt creep are a bad mix.
Always.
And that's why often with like the osmolator, you'll see that the float is the secondary and it's above the water level. Mm-hmm. It's not sitting there submerged. And actually there is they usually give you a second set of magnets and you can actually move the float much higher.
Anywhere you want, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so optical sensors usually fail off, which is less of a concern. Floats actually can fail on and dump water in. Off, I will say the number one concern with failing off is related to your sump design. If your sump only houses the return pump area, only has a gallon of water, and you evaporate a gallon of water a day,
first thing
that is where it's going to empty first, is where the return pump is pumping water out, and then the pumps are going to start to run dry in as little as a day. So that is probably the biggest concern. I will also tell you that I've had mixed results with other technologies, being some of them operate on temperature, some of them operate on conductivity. Mm-hmm. Hydor had one on conductivity. I never used it, but the reviews were pretty poor on it. Like salt, also, no matter what it is, tends to corrode almost anything it touches, even the best.
Even if it's titanium?
Specifically, if it's kind of submerged to water and exposed to a lot of oxygen, it just oxidizes so much faster. I'm trying to think of another one that was conductivity.
Did Innovative Marine had one? Yeah, there was.
Does that one still exist?
2 little prongs. It might actually.
You have to read the reviews for sure. The one that was based on temperature, some of you will remember this one. I don't know if it still exists even. Is the Elos one? So Elos had a really sexy one, which is the only thing that went in your tank was this tiny little basically like a 2-watt heater or something, right? Like just a couple watt heater that went in the tank. And basically, if it was submerged, it wouldn't heat up. If it wasn't submerged,
would
then it would
overheat.
heat up and it would trigger the auto top up. Okay, so I will tell you, I actually had pretty good results with that thing, and I liked it. But the overall from the community was it sucked.
Sounds like it would fail on more than anything else.
I don't. It worked for me, and it was like I don't know. If you needed a low profile one, like like an all in one, or I don't know, man. I thought it was like I'd be curious if it still even exists because Elos just isn't as widely distributed as it once was. But there are other technologies out there than just optical and float sensors, but
it goes back up to one of the most popular is also the most expensive and most trusted over years.
Yep, and don't use the latest tech. I don't care how sexy. So unless you want to be the trailblazer, so be it.
We believe matters most is that you can hide your ATO next to the tank. I adopted a piece of furniture from I picked up a 40 breeder on Craigslist. Some guy was shutting it down. He had made his own acrylic box inside a little stool that was like leather top type stool. Looked like a piece of furniture. You can actually sit on it and take your shoes off and turn them on or put them on or what have you. But inside was the ATO reservoir. Easy peasy.
So yeah, I mean you can put all kinds of things next to a tank. So go to like a Home Goods or all that kind of stuff.
A little hamper, a little table.
Like a chest.
Yeah.
So you get like a chest, and then inside there you can put a box to hold all your water. You could probably put your test kits and stuff in there too, and throw a little decorative rug over the top to make your spouse happy, and it will just look like a piece of furniture in the room, and not an auto top off box. So
or you could do it like me in my old house and just put a brute trash can in the hallway. That was really ugly and such an eyesore.
For a long time, I had just a 5-gallon bucket sitting next to the tank, which is like, man, I built this thing to be beautiful. I bought a beautiful stand, a beautiful tank. I've got 5-gallon buckets sitting next to it. And like for $50, I could go to the Home Goods and find either a footstool or something like that to be able to
with storage.
I don't. This is one of those things where like I feel like there's a missed opportunity for somebody to make these things. Like somebody's good with acrylic, go to Home Goods and like create
start fitting
autotopofffootstool.com. And you could create things because I think a lot of people would buy a little piece of furniture that can go next to the tank and store all that water.
Well, yeah, you don't even need acrylic. Just think of anything that will hold water, a week's worth of water, regardless of shape, size, or what have you, and find a container or find something that it can fit in that doesn't look like it's just a container sitting next to your tank.
Yeah, anything that can fit in there. Absolutely. All right. Another thing you can do with the auto top-offs is you may not understand, like if you want to get a week, but your container isn't big enough, is you can change the evaporation with a lid, flow, or fan. They will all impact these things. So most of the evaporation comes from new air interacting with the surface of the water. So if you put a lid on the tank, that will block some light for sure, and probably more than you think. But if you're like got a fish only, you may not care. And what it will do is prevent all that evaporation. So like I think of the old like JBJ like cube tanks.
Oh, the BioCubes?
BioCubes, right? Those things that had like a kind of almost a sealed lid on it.
Hardly would evaporate.
Dude, I could put like a cup of water a week in there. So great for a low maintenance home environment, for an office environment.
Yeah.
So if you put that top on there, you were not evaporating water at all, right?
I think back to my 125 and going from a 40 breeder that didn't evaporate as much, like volume-wise, to when I went to my 125 and realizing just how much an open top, open sump with a display sump on the backside actually evaporated by following the mold and the water growth in my windows when it was wintertime and cold outside. I would... Not just to help you save on how much water you have to store in your ATO, but slow evaporation if some of those humidity problems are your problem.
Yeah. So next one here is RODI as a source of fresh water is the only thing that won't build up contaminants over time. And I doubt most people have thought of this. Like most people are. Almost everybody that's serious about this is using RODI water, right? But this is a good feel-good point on this then for making the right decision here, because you don't really know what's in your tap water. And it's one thing to make up some salt water, like with some tap water is dechlorinated or whatever. It's only whatever's in there today. However, when you are replacing the evaporated water, remember we said earlier, like when the water evaporates, the salt doesn't go anywhere. It just gets like more concentrated. The water is the thing that's leaving. Same thing with whatever's coming out of your tap water. So if I got copper in my tap water, if I've got silicates in my tap water, if I've got any number of negative things, iron and stuff in there, if I got all that stuff in my tap water, I'm adding it to replace the evaporation every day. So every day I'm adding another gallon worth of that stuff in the water, 365 days a year.
Let's talk about building
it's just
up.
building up every single day. So it's not that, I put some tap water in there today and it wasn't toxic. Now we're talking about the buildup of 365 days times every single year after that. And so that is why we use RODI water for tap off, is because it's the only thing that won't add anything to the water other than water. It's the water that's leaving. We're replacing the water. We're not adding more elements.
Ultra pure water. Yeah.
That is the best reason as to that. So there are some hard lessons here.
First hard lesson with ATO redundancy and daily maintenance safely. Caulk in the ATO is the biggest risk, and we started doing this Master the Apex series where we're talking about how to implement caulk washer smartly and safely, and that was the eye-opening aha moment where I will not go back to dosing caulk out of an ATO again if I wanted to use caulk. I've done caulk washer before and increased its saturation with a little bit of vodka in the big 25-gallon brute trash can, and then that 25-gallon brute trash can would would ATO my top off my tank for like almost a month. But I had to replace my Tunes osmolator pump twice because it failed, because it was in that corrosive caulk washer environment. And there were times where my little egg crate solution to keep the pump off of the slurry, that little zip tie that hold the pump on didn't actually hold, and then off with the pump would go into the slurry down in the bottom, and now I'm dosing just straight caulk washer paste slurry into my tank.
Just so many ways for this to go wrong, and it's tempting because it's a really easy water manage. It's the only thing is to get like calc in your auto top off is going to manage calcium, alkalinity, pH, and salinity
all naturally too, because it evaporates and it fills itself back up.
Super tempting. There's just so many things that can go wrong with it. So if I were to do that, I would definitely put the whole thing on a pH controller. But I would actually, instead of buying the pH controller, what I'd probably do is just buy a dosing pump and dose the calc slurry instead.
Yeah,
not slurry. Dose the saturated calc.
Yeah,
instead.
Get yourself a reservoir like an ATO reservoir, but not in any way related to your ATO. And then put a dosing pump on that caulk washer reservoir and just dose daily instead of tying it to your ATO.
Okay, we mentioned this a little bit earlier, but hard lesson. Solenoids will fail, not if, but when, and by that I mean most of them will fail within 12 months. Yeah, they're just not designed to last a long time, especially when most of the time their powered function is open. So
yeah, that's the big one.
If it was normally closed or normally open and it just required power to close, well, they'll probably last a lot longer. It depends on the function for the solenoid.
Right.
But if it's on, powered most of the time, it's going to wear out. I just would never trust a solenoid to last more than 12 months, which puts it in that category of...
like heater category. Replace it.
Replace it.
Yeah.
Or... man, your redundancy better be good because you need to count on this thing failing. It's not or, it has to be both.
It will, it will fail.
Your redundancy has to be, your redundancy game, if you're relying on a solenoid, has to be really good because you have to 100% count on that thing failing. If that's your only thing, if a solenoid functioning is the only thing between dead tank and live tank, It's already a dead tank. It just hasn't happened yet.
This is why we manage it and mitigate that risk by putting instead of running the RODI system straight to the tank, we run the RODI system to a 10 or 5 or 10 gallon reservoir. So if and when that solenoid gets stuck or powers on or fails on, the only thing it's going to do is fill up that ATO reservoir to the point where the float valve, the other redundancy, goes like this and closes, and that's as far as the water is going to go.
Mm-hmm. Another one here is, this one's really important. How secure the sensors are attached matters, because if you have the sensors just willy-nilly in there, like I think of, what's that little teeny one that plays the song? There's an ATO that has like this little teeny guy, and it has a little magnetic optical on the other side.
Duetto or Aqua? I forget which one that one is.
I forget, but it's the problem with it. Yeah, that's it right there. That Duetto. Yeah. So the problem with it isn't the fact that it doesn't work. It's the fact that like it's just barely magnetically coupled through the glass, and the tiniest little bump, the thing falls off, stops functioning.
Another one I'd be worried about too are those sensors that sense through the glass, water level through the glass. Same thing. And probably another reason why the Tunes osmolator's track record is so well known is because if you've ever taken and tried to take apart those Tunes magnets when they get together, I mean, you're talking like all of your arm strength, even like putting it on the side of a table to try to help force it and dislodge it off. So a strong magnet.
So just think about it. However your float sensor is attached, if you think that it looks like it's loose and it could fail, it will. It just hasn't happened yet.
We learned the hard lesson of how unplugging is a common issue. So a couple things. One, that annoying sound because from the Tunes osmolator, because my water level's too high. I just got done with a water change. I know I'm waiting for the water level to kind of readjust itself and get back, but my ATO is just screaming. All right, let me just unplug you for a couple minutes until the water level comes back, and then I'll come back and I'll plug you back in. We'll be good. Week later, dry tank. I completely forgot to plug that Tunes that ATO back in.
Unplugging the ATO is a super common issue, and mostly related to those alarms. And that's a good reason to use, like you said, like you do a water change. The chances you're going to change at the exact drop of water is pretty low.
Yeah.
So another good reason to use the extra set of magnets I gave you to move the float, which is the alarm,
offset them
up just a little higher.
Yeah, right? Give you a little more space.
Give you a little. Prevent you from making the dumb mistake of unplugging it.
Or use feed modes. And when you're doing maintenance or doing something, have everything automated. So when I push a button to do some maintenance, it's automatically going to come back on. And my ATO has like a 5-minute delay to where the water level set. It does all the work for me. I don't have to try to remember or leave my keys or whatever to plug it back in.
So there's all kinds of reasons where I'm doing work on the tanks. Like, so if I'm floating bags in the tank,
unplug the ATO.
I would normally go unplug the ATO because it's going to scream at me.
100%.
If I'm going to do a water change, I'll turn the return pumps off, and then it goes up in the sump. Unplug it. There's 50 different reasons why I'd unplug the ATO to stop it from screaming at me. Yeah. Instead, if I use the Apex and just hit the feed mode, what it will do is it'll turn it off for the next 60 minutes and then turn it back on.
Yeah.
That to me is the right solution. I also have used Kyle's boxes in that case. Like if I'm going to do a water changes, I'll go hit the one button or the one little toggle switch, and then the Apex, it'll tell the Apex to turn off both the return pumps, turn off both the UVs, turn off all of the power heads, turn off the protein skimmer. When I turn the thing back on, make sure to delay the protein skimmer for about 20 minutes to let the water level normalize before the skimmer comes back on. We'll do all those things within a single switch.
Without me plugging the power.
What would I have to have done before, man? It would have been 8 million switches. And then it allows me to leave 2 of the Kessels on or something so I can still see in the tank, without pulling cords. So yeah, that is one of the biggest issues with a hard lesson with ATO is there's so many reasons to pull the cord on it. Don't do any of them.
We also, hard lesson to take some advice from is nano ATOs are designed for nano tanks. And for me, my definition of nano for me is like 40 gallons and below.
Sure.
But there's run times or max run times on some of these pumps. There's some ATOs that come with this little tiny little pump right here. Well, there's no way that's keeping up with like my gallon and a half per day or 2 gallons per day on a 125. So just because your ATO is cheap doesn't mean that it's going to match your size of a tank. A lot of the cheaper options are for nano tanks.
Yeah, so like the Tunes Osmolar Nano is specifically designed for a smaller tank. I don't remember the exact gallons, probably say the product description.
Yeah, 50, I think, somewhere around there.
But like the main reason is because it will the timer inside of it will cut off at some point in time and just manually shut it off because it knows that it's on a smaller tank.
Yeah.
And it also doesn't have the same optical sensors and stuff in it. It's relying on time and mechanical float switch.
Yeah, they are made for nano.
All right. Another hard lesson here is the cheap ATO does not cost less. You just think it does because you're thinking about the cost of the actual ATO. When the cheap one destroys your floors or some element of your tank and floods and causes you all your time, you will find out that the cheap one costs you more, especially when you go replace it with a more expensive one.
100%.
So yeah, don't think that the cheap one costs less because in the end, it almost certainly doesn't. There is, again, just a handful of areas where the
most expensive is the most popular.
Yeah, it's because the whole community has completely adopted this as the best option. Tunes Osmolator is one of them. All right, what's next?